Northern forest old growth is remarkably similar throughout the broad landscape from Maine to Minnesota. These forests generally have a canopy dominated by old and large shade-tolerant species, withstanding dead trees and large quantities of coarse woody debris on the forest floor. They also have canopy gaps, which allow shade-intolerant species to emerge. Shade-tolerant species can reproduce in their own shade and may dominate the site indefinitely, unless there is disturbance in the stand. Gaps in the canopy created when old trees die or by windstorm damage allow sunlight to reach the forest floor and shade-intolerant species to colonize and reproduce in full sun. Rather than a forest of one or two dominant shade-tolerant species with large straight trunks standing densely packed, old-growth forests are characterized by trees of all age classes, several tree species, sunny canopy gaps and dense shade, withstanding dead trees as well as tree trunks in various stages of decay lying on the forest floor. Within the Sylvania Wilderness, eastern hemlock and sugar maple are the most shade-tolerant species and occupy the upper canopy, creating a dense shade. However, the trees are advanced in age and beginning to die. Both species are reproducing, but shade-intolerant species such as yellow birch, red maple, and eastern white pine are also present and attempting to reach sunlight in canopy gaps. Without additional disturbance, these shade-intolerant species may reach the sun in gaps first, while the hemlock and sugar maple remain in the understory shade, waiting for a chance to reach the upper canopy. Other gaps in the canopy at Sylvania Wilderness were created because the substrate is very wet. Small depressional wetlands whose edges are dominated by green ash and yellow birch will most likely remain in an open and sunny condition indefinitely because the hemlock and sugar maple cannot colonize the wet soils. The history of the northern forest is a history of human exploitation of its woody resources stretching back centuries. Native Americans set fires to encourage certain types of tree and shrub growth that would facilitate hunting. There are indications they may also have encouraged the growth of nut trees to harvest nuts for animal feed. Early white settlers cut the forest to harvest the timber, make charcoal, and to clear the land for agriculture. Very few places within the northern forest escaped these activities. Today we see a forested landscape whose composition and extent is largely the result of glacial activity, catastrophic weather events like ice storms and windstorms, or subsequent human manipulations. The woods here are a mix of what scientists call early and mid-successional forest. All of these woods were cut many decades ago. In some cases they were cut repeatedly or were cut for conversion to agricultural uses. Now that the lands have been protected from agriculture and logging, the land is reverting back to a forested state. Because the woods have been released from disturbance for only 80 to 120 years, they still have a large complement of pioneer species that are shade intolerant and must have full sun to colonize. Species such as gray birch, trembling aspen, balsam poplar, and paper birch are still at high levels, but sugar maple is also represented. At some point in the not too distant future, these woods will most likely be dominated by sugar maple. A fascinating aspect of the northern forest is the woods look similar from east to west, although these far western woods would probably never be the same as easterly woods because of moisture gradients. These western woods tend to be drier than the eastern woods of the northern forest, and their composition will include a different suite of species. Those species that cannot withstand the drier conditions, like American beech, are not represented here, whereas they are major forest components in the east. At the western limit of the northern forest, we have scattered pockets of relatively drought-resistant pioneering species embedded in broad expanses of grassland, like the aspen parkland seen here. Farming and grazing have further limited the size of these aspen parklands, confining them within the landscape. Further west, even the aspen parkland communities give way to the prairie, where trees like the cottonwood are limited to river bottoms and riparian areas. As with the rest of the northern forest, this far western portion was once glaciated and the soils are similar to those found elsewhere. Outwash deposited by glacial meltwater, flowing from and through the ice sheet, and glacial till gouged up and plastered down by the ice. Common tree species are trembling aspen, balsam poplar, and bur oak. Each of these species is adapted for colonizing sunny areas. The aspen and poplar groves are clonal, sprouting from interconnected roots, and are actually one large plant. The understory in these groves is a mix of species that you would find further east, such as Canada anemone, and prairie species that you would find further west, such as prairie rose. Bur oak are the northernmost of the eastern oaks. In the west, they are a pioneer tree, bordering on and invading the prairie grasslands, and often standing alone as sentinels. Occasionally, a swampy flat will be populated with tamarack, seen here in northwestern Minnesota. Within the stands of bur oak on the prairie edge, one occasionally finds an isolated stately cottonwood, found in abundance on river bottoms throughout the prairies.